António, Prior of Crato. António, Prior of Crato. Portuguese pronunciation, âtɔniu, 1531, 26 August 1595, sometimes called the Determined, the Fighter, the Independentist, or the Resistant, was a grandson of King Manuel I of Portugal who claimed the Portuguese throne during the 1580 dynastic crisis. According to some historians, he was King of Portugal for 33 days in 1580. Philip Roman II of Spain prevailed in the succession struggle, but António claimed the throne until 1583. He was a disciple of Bartholomew of Braga. Early life. António was born in Lisbon, the illegitimate son of Prince Louis, Duke of Beja 1506–1555, and Violante Gomes. Some sources argue that his parents were later married, perhaps at Evora. His mother may have been of Sephardic Jewish extraction, as many Portuguese sources maintain, or possibly of New Christian, a forced convert of Jewish or Muslim origin extraction. At least one source says she was a member of the minor Portuguese nobility, the daughter of Pedro Gomes from Evora. She died a nun at Santarém on 16 July 1568. António was educated in Coimbra, and he was placed in the Order of St. John. He received the wealthy priory of Crato as a benefice. In 1571, he was named governor of the Portuguese fortification at Tangiers in Morocco. Nonetheless, little is known of his life until 1578. In that year, he accompanied King Sebastian of Portugal 1557–1578 in his invasion of Morocco, and he was taken prisoner by the Moors at the Battle of Alcácer Quibir, the same battle where the young king was slain. António is said to have secured his release on easy terms by concocting a fiction. He was asked the meaning of the cross of St. John that he wore on his doublet, and he replied that it was the sign of a small benefice which he held from the Pope, something he would lose if he were not back in Portugal by 1 January 1579. His captor, believing him to be a poor man, allowed his release upon payment of a small ransom. Claimant. While António was a prisoner in Morocco, his uncle Henry, the Cardinal Archbishop of Evora and only surviving brother of King John Roman III of Portugal 1521–1557, was proclaimed the new monarch. The cardinal was old and the last legitimate male representative of the royal line. In January 1580, when the Portuguese courts were assembled in Almeirim, where the rightful heir of the Portuguese throne was decided, old Cardinal King Henry died without having designated a successor. The regency of the kingdom was assumed by a governing junta composed of 5 members. By this time, the Portuguese throne was contested by several claimants. Among these were Catherine, Duchess of Braganza, King Philip Roman II of Spain, and António, the Prior of Crato. All 3 had problems. Catherine was a woman, António was illegitimate, and Philip was a foreigner. Catherine was adjudged to have been the legitimate heir posthumously, after her descendants obtained the throne in 1640 through King John Roman IV of Portugal. However, in 1580, she was but one of several possible heirs. According to the feudal custom of primogeniture, the oldest living son of the king was to be proclaimed the legitimate successor. Since the line of King John Roman III, son of King Manuel I, was extinguished on the death of King Sebastião in Morocco, Manuel's next son, Prince Louis, was the legitimate heir. Since he had died, his son, António, should have become the new king. Although his birth was illegitimate, precedent had been set in 1385 with the proclamation of John, son of Pedro I, as king. John I was also of illegitimate birth, but António's enemies seized on his illegitimacy to put forward their own candidates. António, relying upon popular hostility to a Spanish ruler even if Philip's mother was Portuguese, presented himself as an alternative candidate to King Philip Roman II. He endeavored to prove that his father and mother were married after his birth, but no evidence of the marriage could be found, and whether such a marriage ever took place is still debated. António's claim was not supported by the nobles or gentry, because many of them had been bribed, promised future benefits, or threatened with the loss of their privileges and estates. Most of Antonio's partisans were drawn instead from the lower clergy, such as Antony of Siena, the peasantry, and artisans. Philip ensured the success of his claim to the Portuguese crown by using gold from the Americas to bribe the upper classes of Portugal. These aristocrats and rich believed that a personal union of the Spanish and Portuguese crowns would be highly profitable for Portugal, whose economy was then failing, which would maintain formal independence as well as autonomous administration in both Europe and Antonio tried to win the common people to his cause, cashing in the diffuse anti-Spanish Portuguese identity and comparing the current situation to the one of the 1383–1385 crisis. Then, just as in 1580, Philip Roman II invoked arguments of blood nature to inherit the Portuguese throne, and like in 1580, the Master of Abbeys John, illegitimate son of King Peter I of Portugal, claimed his rights to the throne that ended in victory in the Battle of Aljubarrota and in the courts of Coimbra in 1385. King. On 19 July 1580, Antonio was proclaimed King of Portugal in Santarém, which was followed by popular acclamation in several locations of the country. However, he governed in continental Portugal for only 20 days, culminating in his defeat in the Battle of Alcantara by the Spanish Habsburg armies led by Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, Duke of Alba, on 25 August. After the above event, he attempted to rule Portugal from the island of Terceira, in the archipelago of the Azores, where he established an opposition government that lasted until 1583, and where he even minted coin, a typical act of sovereignty and royalty. His rule was recognized only in the Azores, where his supporters, such as Cipriano de Figueiredo and Violante de Canto, were able to organize a resistance. Meanwhile, on the continent and in the Madeira Islands, power was exercised by Philip Roman II, who was recognized as official king the following year by the Portuguese courts of Tamar. Exile. In early 1581, he fled to France, carrying with him the Portuguese crown jewels, including many valuable diamonds. He was well received by Catherine de' Medici, who pretended to have a claim to the crown of Portugal. She looked upon him as a convenient instrument to be used against Philip Roman II. By promising to cede the Portuguese colony of Brazil to her and the sale of some of his jewels, Antonio secured support to fit out a fleet manned by Portuguese exiles and French and English adventurers. As the Habsburgs had not yet occupied the Azores, he sailed for them with a number of French adventurers under Philip Strozzi, a Florentine exile in the service of France, but was utterly defeated at sea by the Alvaro de Bazan, first Marquis of Santa Cruz, at the Battle of Ponta Delgada off the coast of the island of São Miguel between 25–26 July 15. He then returned to France and lived for a time in Rouen near Paris. Fear of assassins employed by Philip Roman II drove Antonio from one refuge to another until he finally went to England. Queen Elizabeth I of England favoured him for much the same reasons as Catherine de' Medici did. In 1589, the year after the Spanish Armada, he accompanied an English expedition under the command of Francis Drake and John Norreys to the coast of Spain and Portugal. The force consisted partly of the Queen's ships and partly of privateers who joined in search of booty. Antonio, with all the credulity of an exile, believed that his presence would provoke a general rising against Philip Roman II. However, none took place, and the expedition was a costly failure. Later life. Antonio soon fell into poverty. His remaining diamonds were disposed of by degrees. The last and finest was acquired by Nicholas Harlay, Seigneur de Sancy, from whom it was purchased by Maximilian de Bethune, Duc de Sully. It was later included among the jewels of the crown of France. During his last days, Antonio lived as a private gentleman on a small pension given by King Henry Roman IV of France. He died in Paris on 26 August 1595. The church was demolished in 1811. He left 9 illegitimate sons by 3 different women. In addition to papers which he published to defend his claims, Antonio was the author of the Panegyris Elponsi Lusitanorum Regis Coimbra 1550, and of a cento of the Psalms Sami Confessionales, Paris 1592, which was translated into English under the title of The Royal Penitent by Francis Chamberlain, London 1659, and into ancestry. Descendants. Antonio, being a cleric, was never permitted to marry but had illegitimate children with several women.